All right, we've arrived at the big day. It's time for closing. Let's get you your new home. So we've gone through the final walkthrough, and now we are sitting down at the closing table. In different states, this is handled differently, so be sure to check whatever your local area has, and with your agent. But in Indiana, we conduct closings at a title company. So typically, you'll go to the title company and sit down with them to sign all of your paperwork. And what's that paperwork look like? The number one thing is the deed. Your deed says that you own this parcel, this home, this piece of property, and the deed transfers from the seller to the buyer during the transaction. So that deed is the most important document because it establishes your ownership. You also have all of your final loan documents that will outline clearly how much that you've borrowed, what the payment schedule looks like, what your interest rate is, and all of the details to the financing the home. If you're paying in cash, it's a little different because you're just paying in cash. But for most people, when they take on a mortgage, they'll have lots of loan paperwork that clearly identifies what that payment looks like over the next 15 years or 30 years or whatever your mortgage is for. And then finally, you'll have the settlement statement as well. The settlement statement, as I mentioned in an earlier video, lists out who's paying for what the buyer's paying for, what the seller's paying for, and how much falls into each of those categories. Who has what credits, who has what responsibilities. If that's all outlined, and be sure to work with the title company and with your agent to explain every line. And you should see that ahead of time so that there are no surprises once you get to the closing table. Also required at closing will be your financing. Oftentimes you'll need to have a cashier's check or some sort of certified payment, wire transfer for however much you're responsible for that closing. So usually companies will require some sort of certified funds to make sure it's a firm transfer of money for the exact amount that's required of you. And once again, that's detailed on the settlement statement. So you'll be working with your bank ahead of time, or whatever institution you're using for your funds, to get that money in place and to make sure anything that you're responsible for on the buyer side of the transaction, or the seller side if you're the seller, goes into place and everyone gets paid appropriately and everything gets taken care of for all the parties involved in your transaction. In some cases, there may not be much to bring to the table depending on what you've negotiated as the buyer. But in other cases, you may have several $1,000s to pay. It really just depends on what's been negotiated, and work with your agent to make sure you are fully clear on what your responsibilities are and what the right mechanisms are to make sure that payment's in place. So the title officer is going to work through the closing. They're going to have you sign all of your paperwork, and once that paperwork's in place for both parties, the transaction will be completed. The deed will transfer with the county once everything's filed appropriately, and you will be the owner of a brand new home. So make sure you are super clear on everything you're signing. Your agent's there to be your advocate, your assistant, and to explain anything you need along the way. And once you're all done with all that, it's time to celebrate. You're going to get the keys to your new home and you can drive there. I'm assuming that your agent got you possession at closing, because then you're going to unlock the door and celebrate your new home. And be sure to celebrate with your agent, because they've been with you every step of the way and they love to see your success. That's ultimately why all of us agents are in this business, to help people and to help people with what can often be the most stressful purchase of their lives. And moving's a big thing, right? And so it's so fun when you get to that closing table and when you ultimately complete the transaction and get to take that next major step in your life.